everybody. It is 10 o'clock on Saturday night, 10 o'clock Eastern time where I am. My name is Chris Weave, and you are watching Starfleet Tactical. So we didn't have a show last week. I was at a science fiction convention, but I'm back this week. And I'm pretty much solo. We might have an appearance by Lissa later today. She's currently busy taking care of her grandfather, but she might drop in a little bit later. Pat is currently traveling internationally, doing his Navy gig thing. So I said that today's going to be a question and answer show. Wright is asking, do I speak for my employer? No, I do not speak for my employer. In fact, I've started introducing myself at science fiction conventions by saying, you know, I was a former professor at U.S. Naval War College. I'm a war game designer and naval analyst. My hobbies are naval history, science fiction, space combat, and not speaking for my employer. So those are my hobbies. So, but it's good to see everybody or see some of the usual suspects in the chat here. So this is going to be a show where I'm going to go through a few odds and ends, talk about some things that are sort of things that I think it makes sense to tell you guys all about. And then later on, the plan is that I'll do some question and answering stuff. I see that TJ and some others have already started asking a few questions, so that's great. I'm looking forward to answering them. So let's see. To start off with, let's see if I can remember. And you know what I forgot to do is I forgot to upload my slides. So I'm going to do them from, actually, hold on just a second. Let me, oops, sorry about that. Sorry, everybody. This is just, my computer was not quite doing what I wanted it to do. So there we go. Okay. So this is I'm going to go through a couple of slides. It's really only about 4 or 5 slides. It's mostly just so that I don't forget to say something while we're talking about that. So here we go. So a couple of announcements. So first of all, you'll see that I've got a schedule up there. And we're going into a period, we've sort of been in a period where like every other week I'm available. We're kind of going to continue in that period. So next week, today's the 8th. Next week, no show on the 15th of October. And one of the reasons why we've done a couple of question and answer shows. We've had Alec on. It's always great to have Alec on. I haven't been very good about preparing something specifically, and part of that is because that event I've got on the 19th of October. So there are 2 things that I really do for fun that involve YouTube as sort of a hobby thing. This is one of them. Starfleet Tactical is one of them. But the other one is I also run an online gaming, professional wargaming convention that works in, we do our thing for a couple of days in April, but we're doing something we're calling the Showcase this time. So the name of the convention is Connections Online. We did it this year, we did it the year before, but this year, next week, we're doing, not next week, the week after, the 19th of October, we're doing the Connections Online Showcase. And so I have been spending a lot of my limited time, my limited energy on prepping for the Connections Online Showcase. So if you go to tabletop.events and do a search for Connections Online Showcase, you should find it. If you're interested in this sort of thing, there's a nominal fee. Basically, what we're doing is we're having 7 game designers in 2-hour blocks, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, finishing at 11 o'clock at night. These 7 game designers are going to go through and talk about the games that they've designed. And they're all people that have designed games for, they're professional game designers. They've done something and they're going to try to walk us through what they did and why they made the decisions they made, and maybe a few turns of the game, et cetera, so we can get an understanding of exactly how they do their thing. And so this is sort of an experiment. We didn't do this previously. We're seeing how well this works out. And it may or may not have any interest to anybody here, but that's one of the things that's sort of sucking up my time and energy in the meantime. 22nd and 29th of October, I will be here by myself because Pat's still traveling. We don't know what Pat's schedule looks like for November. We know that on the 5th of November, I'll be at a science fiction convention and I won't be doing a show. I expect to be here on the 12th and the 19th of November, but we don't know about Pat. And then I'm expecting no show on the 26th of November. That's a Saturday after Thanksgiving, and I'll actually be at a science fiction convention for that as well. So I sort of signed up for a lot of science fiction conventions. I guess I had a lot of, pent up desire to go to cons. And so I'm kind of running the gauntlet right now. So we've got a couple of group events that we've talked about. We haven't executed on yet. Still want to do the Exordium book read along. I've been behind on that, so that's my fault. Also, the Babylon 5 watch along that we're planning on doing the first half of the first season. So the idea is that once I get my act together, then Pat and I will sit down and we'll talk about all the space combat stuff that we see in Babylon 5 and how we think it works, etc., for the first half of the first season. And then we'll continue and do the rest of Babylon 5. A quick little thing that was sort of left over. I was watching the last episode and I started an explanation, but when Alec and I are both on the show together, we have this tendency to feed off of each other. And it's despite the fact I made like 3 attempts to finish the thought, I never actually got the thought finished. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the thought. The thought goes like this. In the one episode of Strange New Worlds where they're trying to hide in the gas giant, the atmosphere of the gas giant, they talk about how the captain says everybody should leave the secondary hull. They should all evacuate the secondary hull because they thought it was in danger of collapse. And I said that I thought that was kind of silly. Didn't make any sense to me. Why would that be more in danger of collapse than any other part of the ship? I talked with Andy Presby about it, and Andy goes, no, actually that does kind of make sense for the following reasons. First of all, based upon his reading of the tech manual and some interviews that he's seen with like Sternbach and stuff like that, he thinks that basically there's a lot of pressure tight compartments in the saucer section of the Enterprise, at least in terms of the Enterprise D. And so if we sort of extrapolate that back in time, maybe this was just sort of a Starfleet design consideration that there's actually, you can think of all those corridors as being individual pressure vessels. There's probably some areas there that have large amounts of equipment that we're not seeing that may or may not be pressurized, but the people parts are generally you can think of this as being there's people parts inside a hull that is largely not entirely people part, right? And so those hallways are probably pressure vessels, etc., which means they're relatively small and they're intended to be pressure tight. When you go down to the secondary hull, okay, it's round. That's good from a dealing with pressure standpoint. Round things basically function like an arch, and they sort of, when it squeezes in, that's pretty good. That's why submarines are round that way. But those are pretty large areas. There's some wide open spaces there that don't have a whole lot of reinforcement. So Andy's thinking, and I'm willing to sort of jump on the grenade or press the I believe button. That's what I want to say. I'm willing to press the I believe button on this. Andy's thinking is that actually the secondary hull probably isn't as tough as the primary hull in dealing with a high pressure situation like that. I mean, if you think about it, spacecraft, when do you deal with high pressure situations from the outside in a spacecraft? That's not really kind of your normal thing. So it's probably not their number one design consideration. The JJ verse Enterprise hiding itself in the ocean notwithstanding. And so this is probably a situation where it makes sense to think in terms of, the secondary hull might be a little bit more dangerous to be in. And yeah, okay. Well, then press the I believe button on that. Maybe that wasn't as silly as I first thought it was. Okay, so I've been doing this naval combat series where I've been sort of going through stuff, and you can see that I've added a few things onto the list. I've got a list of things that I want to talk about, and I keep finding new things to add to the list. In fact, I'm trying to remember, is this actually current? Yeah, I added command and control and data links. I'm reading a book by Norman Friedman that actually has the prospect of having a lot of interesting stuff on that sort of stuff. So this is kind of where I'm looking at right now. In the next couple of sessions where I put together a presentation, what I'm planning on doing, the two that I have sort of queued up, is one is going to be a discussion of Renegade Legion Prefect. So specifically the operational briefing, which is what I've got here. So this is a game that was done by FASA back in, let's see, the date of this is 1992. And I'll talk a little bit about the game background, but I want to specifically talk about the section where it's talking about operational tactics. And it's specifically talking about how to, within the context of their specific political and technological setting, how to think about space combat, how to plan a raid, how to think about a raid. And it includes the idea, if you can see these illustrations at all, it includes the idea of something called a maneuver sphere and how you think about maneuver spheres, your maneuver sphere, which is defined by the vector arrow of your spacecraft and what your thrust is, and hence how you can move stuff around, how you can move around the head of that vector arrow, what that ends up looking like, and how that affects your tactical and operational planning as both the attacker and the defender. And so I'm going to go through this in some detail because it's a seriously cool briefing. And I'm also going to point out the things where I think they kind of got it a little wrong. The biggest one of which is, and I'll give you a little preview of that, is it really sort of assumes, I don't think, I need to sit down with somebody who's a little bit better on vector math than I am. I don't think that this I think this assumes instantaneous thrust. I don't think that this assumes continuous thrust. I don't think the shape of these things is quite what it should be. But not in terms of the spheres, but in terms of the paths that they show on the spheres. They show straight lines in situations where I'm not convinced it's a straight line. But I need to talk to somebody that's a little bit better about this stuff than I am. And so if you're interested in this, so this is a game that's been out of print for 20 years, 25 years, ever since FASA. I think FASA went out of business in 1995, if I remember correctly. If you go look online, you can find the PDF of this. It's the operational briefing for Renegade Legion Prefect. So if you want to go and read it, you can. But I think that's a subject worth spending a little bit of time talking about, because I think it's a really, I frequently said in the last episode, as a matter of fact, that I think that one of the things that we don't see enough in science fiction is this idea that professionals develop a vocabulary to describe the situation they're in. This kind of gets towards that, right? It's because a vocabulary is about how you think about the problem. It's how you talk about the problem. And what they do in that operational briefing, it's just like 8 pages. They sort of like set the stage for how you should be thinking about it and how you should be talking about it. The only thing they didn't do is assign brevity words to those individual concepts that they have in there. But otherwise, it's the exact sort of tactical thinking that I would argue is useful for a given particular tactical setting. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. That's probably what I'm going to do the next time. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going back and re-listening to the original Prelude, the Harris Landing, the Trent Hone, the 2 Lautenschlagers. I did a question and answer in there also. I'm listening to all those. I'm going to do a summary because, you know, I was sort of marching forward through all that stuff in June and July, and I was ready to go conquer the world and do Corbett and Wing Hughes and torpedo boats and fighters and all the other stuff. I was ready to do all that stuff, and I, ended up in the hospital and sort of lost momentum on all that. And I need to sort of get my head back into that space so then I can start working on this again. And because I want to march forward with all that stuff. So I'm going to do a summary of what we've done so far. I might actually take that torpedo boats and fighters talk and put that after the Renegade Legion Prefect one, or maybe even before it. before we do the summary. I need to sort of think about that, but it's going to be in there somewhere, and then I'm going to go through all these other things there, and I'm probably going to find other ones to add onto the list. So that's where we are in terms of the topics. Okay, so next one is future plans. So the short version is we're talking about making a few changes, none of which are like we're going to get rid of the show or anything like that. It's going to basically be little changes designed to make the show work a little bit smoother. And I'll talk a little bit about the algorithm a little bit. Oh, hello, Merle. Thank you very much for backstopping me on all of this. So as Merle says, FOSSA actually stopped in April of 2001. It wasn't 1995, it was 2001. So yeah, it's been about 20 years since they went out. They didn't actually go out of business, for what it's worth. All they did was they decided to cease operations. They sort of saw where the vector arrow was going, and it never declared bankruptcy. Still exists as a corporate entity, still owns some rights to stuff. They just ceased operations as an ongoing concern. They didn't want to wait until they declared bankruptcy. And so that's where they are. So in any event, I was talking with Stogie. Stogie is sort of the guy behind the scenes with the Axanar and Ares Studios channel. He's the guy who thinks about YouTube, and he's basically the default YouTube administrator and social media administrator for Alec and the Axanar efforts. And so I was talking with him earlier today, and what we're going to do, there is a Starfleet Tactical YouTube channel, which we haven't used at all. In fact, we don't even do a good job of making sure everything's uploaded to it. But what we're planning on doing is that we're going to start with new episodes. This is the current plan. It might change. I'll let you know if it does. But giving you a heads up, what we're probably going to start doing is new episodes will come out on the Starfleet Tactical channel and the Ares Studio channel. So note, not the Axanar channel, because Stogie actually thinks that it's screwing up the algorithm to have Starfleet Tactical on the Axanar channel, that it's actually hurting the performance of the Axanar channel, and it makes it harder for people to find Starfleet Tactical. So I don't pretend to understand the algorithm. I trust that Stogie does. He spends a lot of time researching it. And so we're thinking we're going to have a separate channel for Starfleet Tactical, plus we'll also show it on the Ares Studio channel. Episodes will be archived on the Starfleet Tactical channel. So they'll sort of premiere on both, but then they'll only, if you want to go see an episode from 6 months ago, you'll have to go to the Starfleet Tactical channel. Starfleet Tactical channel is also one of the two places where I'm going to try to communicate better. Because right now, a lot of the communication happens just in forms of, like, you guys find out if there's a show by going and seeing if I've created the show or if Lissa's created the show. And we don't actually sit down and do anything like messages or anything like that. YouTube has some capability to do that, but we haven't been doing that. We're going to try to start doing that, maybe have a calendar. I need to do a little bit of research on that. I'm still sort of figuring out how to do that. We'll probably also start a Starfleet Tactical Facebook page that will do sort of the same stuff, right? So the goal is to be better about communicating with y'all about where we are, what we're doing, what's the topic of the show, et cetera, because we're trying to make it a little bit more discoverable. You guys all know we're here, but not everybody else does. And we're also thinking about some notional format additions. I've talked about these in the past. Author interviews, both science fiction and history, watch-alongs, read-alongs, et cetera. We've talked about those. I'm also thinking that there's an opportunity there for some pre-recorded content. And so, like, at some point, Pat and I plan on going down to Atlanta to doing a show from the bridge. My intent is to walk in with a couple of other things that we've sort of thought through in advance, and we can also record on the bridge set, and then we can toss them out at one point or another. So that's our thinking on that. The goals in all of this are being better about communication, including a calendar so you guys know when to show up. growing the channel a little bit. And by that, I'm specifically mean I don't want to be a slave to the algorithm. But if we're doing something that obviously, makes it harder for people to find us, we should stop doing that. We should make it easier for people to find us. And I also want to sort of grow the community. So one of the things I like is the fact that you guys come over and you come and visit every Saturday night, and let's do more of that. And I'm still thinking about the idea of having a meetup at Marcon in Columbus, Ohio next Memorial Weekend. TJ makes an interesting comment about Discord, and actually that makes a lot of sense. I should have probably had a Discord server up here. I think there needs to be a Starfleet Tactical Discord server too. That'd be another way that we can pass information around. So I'm thinking about those as options. So let's see. That's it for slides, I think. Yep, that's it for slides. So let me kill that and come back on. So Lissa, would you like to come on and say hi?
Hello.
So how are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good. So how's your grandfather doing?
He's doing good, all things considered.
Yeah, I understand. So, he was in the Navy. We could have him on the show.
I don't know that he wants to be on camera.
Well, I'm perfectly willing to have him on camera if he wants to be on camera. So, it's sort of funny because for 2 years I've been basically coming into his house and I still have not met him.
It's true.
I'm virtually in his house right now, even as we speak. And
also, my
voice from the other room, and that's
my partner is former Navy as well.
Ah, okay.
He was a CB.
CBs are very interesting. There was a CB, the CBs had a detachment on Naval Station Newport. Didn't get a chance to work with them at all, but cool. They're pretty good. So let's see. I think it's time to start looking at questions. So I'm going back to the top. So Wright asks the question, any idea when you can schedule Trent Hone? So the short answer to that is no. Trent's up for it. John Partial is up for it. I want to do one with Trent and John and Pat and Chris Carlson and I. We talked about trying to do it, because Chris and Pat and John all live in Minneapolis, and I sometimes visit them. And then it's like, why would we all just sort of cluster around Chris's screen? It's actually better for everybody if we don't do it when we're all in the same place. It works better if we try to do it like we're doing it now, where people can be spread out all over. I think Trent is in the Washington, D.C. area, if I remember correctly, but I'm not positive about that. He was, at least at one point. So in any event, I haven't had time to schedule that. I'm still not 100%. I'm back to the point where I'm just chronically anemic again, which means that most of the time I'm doing pretty good, but as I described it to a coworker the other day, it's like every now and then the puppeteer just cuts the strings.
That's a mood.
Yeah. So it's like it's weird. I'll be ready to climb Mount Everest, and 5 minutes later, I'm just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm just done.
No spoons, just knives.
No spoons. It's like I had a handful of spoons 5 minutes ago, and somebody just came and stole all my spoons. So I just haven't gotten it done right now. Between connections online and the day job, those have been the things that have been sucking up all my time and energy. Plus, I have gone to a couple of science fiction conventions because I'm finally getting an opportunity to go do that. And I'm like, on Monday, I'm not gonna be available next week because on Monday I'm gonna drive to Des Moines to see my dad. Unless you're a thief. If you're a thief, I'm actually gonna be here with a shotgun. If you're not a thief, I'm gonna drive to Des Moines and see my see my dad, which I haven't seen since mid-July. And then I'm going to go to a science fiction convention on the way back.
I mean, fair enough.
Yeah. It's a small con called Icon in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And one of the founders of this con, or two of the founders of this con, are Joe and Gay Haldeman. So Joe is the author of The Forever War, and Joe is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. And so Joe's not the most prolific author in the world, but he is a relatively well-known one. And, The Forever War's literally been in print for like 40 years. When they were at the Iowa Writers Workshop, they were some of the founders of the small con, and they occasionally come back for it. And this will be the second time I've run into them in Iowa. They live in California. They go to a science fiction cons in Iowa, so, which is cool.
I mean, the ones in California are huge, so.
Yeah. I've only been to 2 cons. I've been to Lost Con twice back when it was still held in Burbank. I went there with my friend Sherwood Smith, co-author of the Exordium series, and my friends Andy and Joelle Presby met at Lost Con. They met at a Lost Con that I was at. So I claim partial credit for the two of them getting together because I had the good sense not to meet either of them that weekend and get in the way.
There you go.
Well, I'm claiming partial credit for them getting together.
I found another one for you. Chris.
Yes.
TJ has a question. How would you define the difference between a space-heavy bomber such as a B-17, 24, or 29 relative to a space torpedo boat?
So that's actually an interesting question that's actually involves a lot of background stuff that I'll have to sort of set the stage for in terms of how to think about these platforms. But airplanes inherently are relatively limited endurance, right? I think the longest airplane flight that I know of is we conducted some missions where B-2 bombers were flying out of Missouri and going to the Mideast and coming back. And the longest I ever heard of was 44 hours, right? And that was pretty much the limit of the endurance of the crew. They had to, in-flight refueling a dozen times to do that, all the way there, all the way back. 44 hours is nothing for a PT boat. They would go out for a week or two at a time, and they could go out as long as they had food and fuel. And so that's ships inherently have a lot more, ships and even boats inherently have a lot more endurance than planes do. They're as a general rule, not entirely the case, but as a general rule, heavy bombers such as B-17s, 24s, 29s, those sorts, were aiming after fixed targets. Now, the Army Air Corps said that they could use B-17s to bomb battleships. No. There were no recorded instances. I don't think there's even been recorded instances of ships underway being damaged by high-level bombing, let alone sunk by high-level bombing. Everybody's going to now point out to Billy Mitchell. Billy Mitchell wasn't doing high-level bombing. He was doing low-level bombing with those. And that was sort of a highly contrived situation. No crews, no anti-aircraft guns. I don't think the watertight compartments were filled, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it was highly contrived. So they're not doing anything defensive against that stuff. Basically, battleships didn't have anything to worry about from heavy bombers, because if nothing else, they're slow targets and you can shoot them down, right? Dive bombers were another thing entirely. Torpedo planes could be a problem, especially if you were a target that wasn't particularly good about fighting back. The Ferry Swordfish bomber, the one that the British plane that conducted the torpedo attack at Taranto, I believe is officially the most successful torpedo bomber of World War II in terms of just tonnage sunk.
Mm-hmm.
They were sinking a lot of junk. I don't think they, it's not like they were going after the Japanese Navy with those things. It's not like they were going after targets that knew that they were under torpedo attack as a general rule. Those airplanes were capable for 1936, thereabouts was when they came out, 37, 30, 35, something like that. They were not modern torpedo bombers by any stretch of the imagination. They were obsolescent at best. And so if you're going to attack ships at sea, you really sort of need torpedo bombers or dive bombers. I mean, the Japanese largely went with dive bombers. They had a really good torpedo bomber towards the end of the war. But by the second half of the war, they were clearly on the defensive, and they weren't doing big strikes like that anymore. They were basically functioning as targets, not functioning on the offense. So they had some planes that never got the credit that they really deserved. Dive bombers were very, very effective. But, a torpedo could do so much more damage than a dive bomber that we were kind of willing to put up with a high level of attrition in our torpedo crews. That's one of the things that really you sort of take away from reading the accounts of some of those battles in World War II is the battles that were sort of fair fights, like Midway. We lost entire squadrons at Midway.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you're doing things like that, it's a war of attrition. It's who can put out the most people and lose the least.
Yeah.
It's not try not to lose anyone, because that's going to be impossible.
And we lost lots of people. I mean, being a naval aviator in 1942 was incredibly dangerous on both sides. Being a submariner throughout the war was incredibly dangerous. Being in a bomber was incredibly dangerous. I don't want to make it sound like the infantry guys had, it was all moonbeams and unicorns and stuff like that for those guys. They had it rough too.
Well, the infantrymen, at least they had like individual numbers on their side. So like if you're rolling a D100, it's less likely to be this is your number. I rolled a nat 1, it hit me.
There were clearly some specialties, some communities in the war that had much higher attrition rates than others. Like a lot of German U-boat guys just didn't come back. They lost like half the people, half or 3/4 of the people in the German U-boat corps didn't come back. We had our submarine forces, I don't think had it quite as bad, but it was still bad for them. So those are what I would say in terms of sort of the differences. But I'm going to get into that more. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think the right model is to think about this as more of a torpedo boat thing. And a lot of that model, the real difference there is the difference between the sea and the sky, right? There's a difference in the medium. An aircraft carrier is a doorway between the sea and the sky. It's a way of having your cake and eating it too. It's a way of, like, you get the endurance of having a ship, but you get the performance of having an airplane. And so it's your way of doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so with that, so I'm going to go into that a little bit more depth and sort of try to set the stage for a conversation about fighters in space combat and when they make sense and when they don't make sense.
Mm-hmm. This was not a question, just a fun fact. If you're in Futurama, the hull of the Planet Express ship is rated for between 0 and 1 atmospheres.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
1 atmosphere is only 14 psi, so it would have been crushed like a tin can in that gas giant.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Traveler role-playing game, you have spacecraft and other things too. You see this in like Space Viking by H. Beam Piper. You have spacecraft hiding in oceans all the time, and I sort of look at it and go, okay, that's not something you get as sort of, you have to design for that.
Yeah, no, like that would be something like, it's definitely rated for atmosphere. entry. Because a lot of spaceships are not, first off. And then, on top of the fact that it's then rated for atmosphere entry, it also has to be rated for XYZ fathoms worth of pressure.
Yeah, and like have the right venting and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. It would have to be very specifically designed for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's things are a product of their environment. Right?
Yeah.
Like submarines, people go, submarines are effectively spacecraft. Well, no, they're not. No, they're not. They're not spacecraft for a lot of reasons, right? Okay, yes, they maintain pressure to keep the ocean from killing all the people inside. But there's lots of places where they're open to the ocean. They use water from the outside for cooling. They use water. They bring it on board and break it down into oxygen. There's lots of hull penetrations that go to the outside. They use it for the ballast tanks. There's lots of seawater penetrations. They need it for thermal control.
Yep.
They need it for propulsion, right? It's your reaction mass. You're using a propeller to shove the reaction mass to the aft and move it forward. And submarines are designed for environments, right? Just like anything else.
Yep.
Same is true of surface ships. You take an icebreaker, you send it to the Persian Gulf, it's not going to perform.
Oh yeah, no, because it's not made for that.
Yeah, because there's been all sorts of assumptions made about what you need to do to maintain, thermal control on the vessel. And those assumptions are exactly the opposite of the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf, the water in the Persian Gulf is like body temperature.
Yep.
It's warm. It's not cold, it's warm. In fact, I think it's frequently above body temperature, which means you actually have overheating problems, which you usually don't have in the ocean. Even in the Caribbean, I knew somebody who got to spend 6 hours bobbing in the Caribbean because his helicopter went down. And it took 6 hours for the surface ship to actually get to where he was. And he said that the water temperature was 80 degrees, but his temperature was 98.6. So he was, despite the fact it was in the water temperature was in the 80s, he was hypothermic when they pulled him.
Yeah, because when your body is exposed to it for that long, it's going to drop your body temperature.
Yeah, it's a big ocean.
Because your core temperature has been affected at that point.
Yeah, and so he also said that he was really glad that he had a real life vest, because the way it works is they were in like 6-foot seas, and the way it works is a wave comes up and pushes you underwater, and then your flotation brings you up towards the surface, and then another wave pushes you underwater, and that keeps on happening. And if you've got enough flotation, you get to go all the way to the surface, and you get to breathe.
Yeah.
Every wave, every other wave, or something like that. You get to do the breathing step. And so he was glad that there's no such thing as too much flotation when you're in that situation. They had a life raft in the helicopter. They forgot to use it. And once they forgot to grab it and throw it out. Once you're in the helicopter, you don't go back in.
Yep.
So, but everybody lived. The worst thing that happened out of it, he was a civilian analyst who was working for the Navy at the time, and they told him he couldn't fly on any more aircraft because somebody figured out how much paperwork you have to fill out if you kill a civilian, and so they wouldn't let him fly anymore. So Ray Wood asked the question: is it safer to use Jeffries tubes instead of the lift in emergency situations like that? Now,
depending on what's happening, it's like think of like a fire in a multi-story building. You're told to take the stairs, not the elevator.
Well, except here's the situation. So I'm assuming that he's talking about the pressure hull situation.
Yeah.
Those, as I understand it, those lifts are self-propelled. Now, there might be the risk that the elevator tube would get crushed, and now your elevator's stuck and can't get someplace. But you're always going to have that risk. The Jeffries tubes underwent this evolution, right? You never got the impression in the original series that the Jeffries tube was anything other than an access to some control stuff. Whereas by the time you get to next gen, it's an entire separate network of corridors designed for dwarfs that runs all throughout the ship, right? It's got the doors. You can do the hands and knees thing. You can basically get any place on the ship by going through a Jeffries tube to get there. Whereas, the only time we ever saw Jeffries tubes in the original series, it was just a thing on the side of the wall that Scotty or Spock would go into and make some,
adjustments.
Make some adjustments, use the weird tuning fork thing, et cetera, to make it work. There was never anything indicating that it was a network of stuff. So I'm not sure that there was a Jeffries tube option on those ships.
Yeah, I don't think in TOS there was the Jeffries tubes option, but in TNG Forward, it definitely is like presented as like the emergency exit kind of situation.
And, it wouldn't surprise me if the answer was that they had a higher pressure rating for whatever reason, because it was viewed as being an emergency escape.
Yeah.
If you go on board, the closest thing I've seen to this in a real vessel is it's not unusual for there to be escape trunks on various places on naval vessels. And sometimes it's just a ladder with a hatch in the ceiling. Right, like in the berthing area that I was in when I was aboard USS O'Kane, I was not quite right underneath. And maybe that berthing area that berthing area might have been partially underneath combat. But I know that when John McCain had her collision, there were people that escaped by going up a trunk like that. They weren't able to get out the door and go up the stairwell, the ladder. They had the actual no shit ladder. The Navy uses the term ladder for things that we would call very steep stairs, but they also have honest to goodness ladders too. And so in that berthing area in berthing 1, spent 2 weeks in berthing 1. In berthing 1, there is a ladder and it's got a hatch and it takes you to the compartment up above. Now, sometimes what you see in engineering spaces on ships are more elaborate escape trunks. And those I've seen ones where there's like a circular escape trunk. And I've also seen squares. The square one had bars all the way around. And so all the way up. So basically as a ladder. The idea being it's a ladder that 3 or 4 people can use at the same time.
Yeah.
On different walls of it. And they all have bifold doors. And the bifold doors are designed in such a way that if there's an explosion, I think it flattens the door out. It's designed to deal with pressure in the engineering space, and it's basically the ones I've seen go like all the way up to the weather deck. And so it's a way of getting out in an emergency.
Yep.
There's plenty of engineering spaces where you can't get out.
That's true. So first off, Mike Forrest, welcome in. Second, so I'm new here to Starfleet Tactical. What is usually discussed? Chris, this is your show, so.
Okay, so the short answer is it covers a wide variety of stuff on Starfleet Tactical. I frequently tell people that my fandom superpowers, I can talk about real world navies and science fiction navies at the same time. So we always try to sort of bring it around to Star Trek at some point or another, but frequently we're talking about real world history, real world Navy type stuff, and the intersection of that with science fiction in general and Star Trek in particular. And so, like, for instance, I've early on in the show, I talked about some of the background documents I've been going through. A lot of those had to do with like U.S. Navy tactical development in their interwar period and how to think about combat. And then I try to sort of relay it back to science fiction in some way, shape, or form. Like for one of the things that I frequently talk about is the importance of doctrine. And doctrine is basically the software that navies run on, right? You've
Yeah.
got a set way of doing things, right? So you don't have one of the examples I always use on this show of something that sort of drives me crazy. It's a short drive. Is one of the episodes of Babylon 5. Now I love Babylon 5, but there was this episode, I can't remember which one it is, but it's like fourth season, maybe third, but I think it was a fourth season episode.
Describe it, and I might be able to tell you.
The Alliance is going on the offensive, right? They're going to conduct a strike against the Shadows. They've got
so right off the bat, season 4 they weren't dealing with the Shadows, so it's prior to season 4. Yeah, it's probably season 3.
I think they finished up the Shadows at the end of season 3, and then season 4 was all about Earth Force, dealing with Earth. So in any event, they're planning this attack. They go to the system where they're going to attack. They come out of hyperspace, and Sheridan starts yelling commands, and they're all orders like small ships cover big ships. Okay, yeah. He shouldn't have to tell them that. They should know. And second of all, that's the sort of thing that should be a pre-planned response, right? It should be in their tactical doctrine that's what they're there for. And at most, it should be something like we would see. The equivalent scene in Honor Harrington would be Honor looking at the display, seeing what's there, seeing what the tactical disposition of the enemy is, and then saying, execute Alpha 4. Because they've gone through, they've got branches and sequels, they know what they've thought about all the contingencies, what all the options are, et cetera, and she's already got a plan for all this stuff, and she just needs to decide which plan is the appropriate plan for what she's seeing. And so not this, little ships cover big ships. Well, duh, that's what they do. In the interwar period, basically the U.S. Navy set up the system so that at one point, all the admiral needed to do was to say, course such and such, go. And everything else they did because they knew what the plan was. They oriented on that particular course. The destroyers knew what their job was to do. I mean, their specific doctrine said that the small ships, the destroyers, should not wait for orders from the flag. They should attack when their local commander thought it was most appropriate. So this is basically like, you know what you need to do. You know what the plan is. I don't need to micromanage you. Right? That's how professionals do things like this. And so we see some of that in Star Trek, but it's always unclear to me how much of that is going on. I mean, it's always tough to tell because everybody in Star Trek is an A-list performer. Oh my God, there are no screw-ups in Starfleet, as near as I can tell. They're all people that your average U.S. naval officer would kill to have that guy in his department or his division.
Oh yeah,
and they're doing their thing. And so, we get the impression that they're sort of, like at no point does anybody have to say, here's what we're going to do to take down their shields. They just seem to do it. Whether that's doctrine or whether that's the writers don't know any better, I don't care. In my head, it's doctrine. So they're good about it. So we discuss a whole bunch of stuff like that. Occasionally Alec Peters is on and we talk about stuff. The very first time I was on, before it was even called Starfleet Tactical, we spent 90 minutes talking about Warhammer 40K. Occasionally,
we've definitely talked about TTRPGs a hell of a lot because that's what I do on a regular basis.
Yep.
Even though a good portion of the time I am behind the scenes, there's also plenty of times that Chris is like, come on with us.
Yes. It's always good to talk to Alyssa. So that's the sort of things that we discuss here.
So TJ's asking what your shirt says. Oh,
it says,
surely not everybody was kung fu fighting. Okay, that reminds me. So
this is a shirt. This phrase popped up at some point, and now if you go onto like Amazon, you can buy like everything else that happens. Some funny phrase comes out. It's and you can buy like 10 different versions of this shirt, but it does say, "Surely not everyone was kung fu fighting."
support your local cat cult.
What is? Oh, is that a tag or something on the?
Yeah, that's the. I bought it recently, so
Oh.
it still doesn't. It still has the tags and everything on it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I went to the mall this week because that still exists in my area. Yeah,
I
support your local cat cult.
Our idea of shopping malls, and shopping malls are the closest thing to the concourse of a space station, concourse of a space colony, right?
You're not wrong, actually, when you put it like that. And Barkley. So Barkley was a giant ball of anxiety. However, he was really good at what he did.
Yeah,
he was a savant, but he was a savant that needed a lot of medication to function properly.
Barkley wasn't lazy. Barkley wasn't incompetent. Barkley was just, not as well socialized as he could have been.
Honestly, as someone who is neurodivergent, I think Barkley is probably, without them saying it, he was autistic.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like they don't have to put it into words, but that's how I interpret him. He is someone who is autistic, who was able to comprehend his job at a high skill level, but he did not have the social skills in order to navigate working alongside a large number of people. Because he probably has some kind of, first off, he has rejection sensitive dysphoria. And he also definitely has sensory issues as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a character in, so I've mentioned the Exordium series by Sherwood Smith and Dave Trowbridge, which is out. There's two different editions of it. The first edition was a paperback from Tor Books. The second is a ebook version from Bookview Cafe. They actually made substantial revisions. Each one of those books is about 50 pages longer. The equivalent of 50 pages longer than it was before. There was some stuff that had been cut out that they put back in, and they rewrote some stuff. One of the things that becomes even more apparent in the second edition of the second book is that one of the principal minor characters, shall we say, principal supporting characters, is autistic. And she's a functioning naval officer. And the way that she functions is, in this universe, they have something called, and this is one of the reasons I love the tactical combat, and why I'm going to at some point, I'm going to do an episode where I talk about tactical combat in the Exordium universe. They've got a tactically useful faster than light jump drive, but they've got speed of light sensors. They've got one FTL weapon. Their other BFG is a speed of light weapon. And so you're literally shooting, you're shooting at targets that you don't know are there. You're predicting that they're going to be there using a technique that's very similar to the gun kata technique that you see in Kurt Wimmer's movie Equilibrium. It's also an Ultraviolet starring Mila Jovanovic, but I think Equilibrium with Christian Bale is a better version of it. And so it's the equivalent of Ramius always turns to starboard at the bottom of the hour sort of stuff. And I think I've mentioned that before. In fact, I think I maybe mentioned it not too long ago, talking with Alan. It's all about Ramius turns to starboard at the bottom of the hour. It's like, I know this, you figure out who you're dealing with, and you're reading you're watching what they're doing. And it's like, okay, they've got the Epsilon series algorithms with the such and such modifications to it. They're clearly following that tactical pattern. This is Ramius. He always turns to starboard at the bottom of the hour, which means I should there, boom, and I've got it, even though I took the shot without even taking a look at it.
Yep.
So the character Warrigal is she is a tactical officer. This is what she does for a living. And she's also very autistic, and she's got her own version of the Tenno that she designed for use in interpersonal situations. So she's basically seeing it in her head.
She made herself a disability aid.
She made herself a disability aid. In the Tenno, the practical Tenno is basically, you can think of it as an ideogram-based tactical language that used to interface with the computer. It's so ideograms like Chinese. So it's approaching the theoretical maximum for how fast information can get into the human brain and how fast you can get it back into the computer. And because it's a language, it has grammar, and things that don't make sense, it'll go tilt on, right? So it constrains you in that only things that make sense are orders that you can give it. There's an issue with that I won't get into because that would be a spoiler. This is all background. But she's figured out that she doesn't interface with humans very well. She doesn't understand them. So she treats every interaction with another human being like it's a tactical situation where she has to sort of plot it out in her head. They did X. I know from past experience that if they did X, I need to look for Y. Oh, they did Y. That means this, which means my response should be this. And I think it's fantastic that when they rewrote that, Dave decided that he was going to write it that way. I think it's fantastic. There was something else I was going to say about the Exordium series and doing a tactical brief on that, but I can't remember what it is. But I'm gonna talk about all. I remember what it is. I'm also going to talk at some point. Remember, I had command and control and data links on there. I'll probably talk about tactical decision aid symbology and stuff like that, because that also is an interesting art form about how you display data in a tactical situation, so you can have it on a horizontal surface and you can read it regardless of which direction you're looking at, and et cetera, et cetera.
I'm not going to make the bad joke that just came to mind. You just put them on a step stool. You display the data.
Yeah, and it said data rather than data because it's technically pronounced data. The only reason people think it's pronounced data is because Patrick Stewart decided it should be pronounced data. But tactical displays are very interesting. Tactical and the development of tactical displays are very interesting, and how that all fits into data links, etc. I often say, the U.S. Navy is working really, really hard right now to improve their data links to get them to the point where they work like you think they should work when somebody gives you the 2-sentence explanation about what a data link is, because it's actually way there's a lot of constraints in how you can implement a data link that aren't immediately apparent from the idea about what a data link is and how you're passing information back and forth between ships. So that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about at some point. Okay, let's see. I'm looking through here. Okay.
Anyone else have any questions?
I'm scrolling.
Well, that was more me inviting them to ask any more questions that they've got. Because it is about time for us to end.
Is it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take one or two others real quick. I don't know what's going on with Josh Thomas and all these.
Oh, I blocked him.
Okay. All right.
He was just spamming the chat.
So my brother, Delon, hello, Delon, My brother Delon says something I've seen in B5 and DS9 is orbital defense platforms. What is everyone's thoughts on the viability of such things? I think a lot of this goes down to the specifics of your technology and your background.
Well, there's that, and also I think orbital defense platforms, on their own, would not be sufficient. But if you also have a fleet backing it up, they would be the big guns, so to speak. Whereas, because they have absolutely no mobility versus the other, like the actual like ships are able to move around and protect the asset.
Yeah, there's that is basically what the French said for the Maginot Line, and it's easy to make fun of the Maginot Line because it didn't work as intended. But I will actually defend the Maginot Line as being part of a good solution to a nasty strategic dilemma that the French had. The biggest part of the strategic dilemma was that there was no stomach with the French populace for having an army that had conscription that lasted longer than about a year. There's not really a whole lot you can teach a soldier to do in a year. There's not a whole lot of proficiency that they can gain. So at best, you can expect that your reserve troops are going to need to fight from a prepared position. So they're going to fight on the offense. So the idea is that the professional force, the army, the professional army, would be your mobile force. Now they ran into budgetary reasons and they didn't make it go. They didn't take it all the way to the coast like they should have, because they just couldn't afford to do it. They skimped on the Ardennes, and as a result, the Germans were able to flank it. But even as it was, it wasn't a bad idea per se. It wasn't a bad idea.
The execution itself was poorly done.
Execution
because of variety of factors.
Execution had some problems. So defensive field works are, defensive capabilities. If nothing else, you could potentially mount something bigger if you don't have to move it around. Which is sort of unlike what we see with oceans, right? The big guns it's always easier to move a gun around on a ship than it is to move it around on the ground. But a lot of people built ships. The Brits in particular built a lot of monitors, which would have like a 14-inch gun, one or two 14-inch guns in a single turret, but would be relatively small in size. And they weren't really intended to do much more than just sort of hang around the harbors and bases and be floating gun batteries. So it can work. It can be useful. If you create a situation where the other guy can spend all of his time doing whatever he has to do to crack that can be a problem. Which is why having a separate fleet available to maneuver against enemy forces is useful. But it can work.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So Olive said, I think in Trek they make small orbital defense platforms way too overpowered, often by having weird remote power transmission for plot device purposes. Yeah, the problem, yes. So my short answer is yes. The longer answer is Star Trek suffers from a problem that's not uncommon in some science fiction, where they add some capability and then you say to yourself, but wouldn't it be useful to have that capability, to use that capability in other ways? Wouldn't it have been useful for us to know about that capability earlier? Like, if I can beam power to these platforms that are out there, why can't I do that for things that have warp engines on them? Right? Why can't I just basically have mobile phaser emplacements or have big ass impulse engines. Why can't I have something that's just basically all it is a phaser, a big ass impulse engine, and a shield generator, and that's it.
Yep.
And when I go into battle,
it's a space cannon. That's all it is.
Yeah. So if I've got these space cannons, why can't I just put an impulse engine on them? And I'm going to be in a space battle, whoosh, and I dump them all out. And now whoever I'm dealing with is not just a Federation starship, but a Federation starship and all of its deployed space.
Well, and the reason why I think we don't see that in Star Trek is because they are very clear about the fact that Starfleet is not supposed to be a military. Now, it does take military actions in instances that it's necessary, like the Dominion War, like going up against the Borg, but their primary mission is research.
Yeah, but there are times where, when they start building warships like the Sovereign and the Defiant and the Akira.
Oh, yeah. Like I said,
when they start building warships, you would think that they would do all the other stuff. Now, maybe the devil is in the details, and there's some specific reason why this doesn't work when you set up the scenario that I just set up. But I think as much as anything, there's this danger that if a writer thinks of some very, very clever technologically based solution to a problem, a technologically based plot device, there's always that danger of like, why didn't we see that earlier? Why don't we see that in situations? It's in its own way, it's sort of like what you saw in the original series episode where the Andromedans come and modify the Enterprise to go like warp 100. It's like, and then they're defeated, right? So they're gone. But hey, the Enterprise can now go warp 100. Isn't that great? No, the writer the next week didn't know that the Enterprise can now go warp 100.
Yeah. Oops.
Oops.
We did not have any continuity in mind.
I like to think that what really happened was there was special gear that they attached to the warp engines, and Starfleet Research came and took the special gear off. And
we'll go with that.
And then they lost it in the big warehouse with the Ark of the Covenant. So
I mean, Section 13 probably got a hold of it at some point, and then who knows where it ended up.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. So there's much discussion about this. So Mike Forrest said, I heard that Japanese aviators were less experienced than our aviators as the war went on. Yeah, they had the most experienced naval aviation cadre in the world at the beginning of the war. And they all died at Midway. When you sink all the carriers and there's no place for them to go, they all died at Midway. And later on, you had guys that they went from having like low-level pilots having 2,000 hours to high-level pilots having 300.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal. And so, they got some much better planes towards the end of the war, and they just couldn't use them.
Yep. Didn't have the skills necessary for it.
So long discussion about the platforms, talking about maintenance and restock and all the other things. Let's see.
Didn't initial Starfleet fighters and Starfleet battles have those specs, impulse engines and phasers?
I am not I really wish that Pat were here, because he's the person to ask about Starfleet battles.
I have no clue.
I will admit that I don't know what the answer is on that. So
I am the producer. This is not my area of expertise. Honest question. Why are things in sci-fi or comics called overpowered? Isn't that the idea? It's supposed to be something we can't do now. So yes and no. Something can be overpowered and still, like, yes, the purpose is to be, like, comparatively to what we can do today, it's way out there. but sometimes you only need so much force, and blowing it way out of the water can occur. So that's what I would refer to as overpowered. It's like in D&D, there's power word kill.
Yeah, as a general rule, overpowered in science fiction and comics is a reference to the idea that something is inconsistent with with the other things we've seen, and or breaks the setting by it existing.
Yeah.
Right? That it's not as interesting a story, or there's some, or it's like how on earth did you get there, right? It's like
it's about balance.
Yeah.
How did we get from step A to step B? Like, I think there was like something we're missing, because we went from A to Z instead.
If you're dealing with 1930s Chicago gangsters, and for some reason this one guy's 45 can take out an armored car, his 45 pistol can take out an armored car, then there's something wrong with that setting.
Look, Delon, I am dyslexic, so
I don't know what the context of that is. We'll come back to it. I want to do this.
I think that one has to do with me calling it Section 13, not Section 31.
Okay. So did you know that Atlanta is the lost city?
Yes.
The residents mutated into mer people thanks to leaky Coca-Cola plant?
Look, I joked with my friends a while back that Floridians are like lizard people, and Georgians are actually fish people, so that, this tracks.
Okay, that works.
Can confirm.
So Delon asked the questions, were the tires on the lunar rover filled with air? No. I would have thought they would be solid. No, also. They were actually mesh. If you look at them up close, they're like a wire mesh. They're not, and they're sort of springy. So you can think of it as sort of springs in a tire form. And they part of the deal with that is that they have a tendency to stir up the lunar dust, and that became an issue because a fender got broken on one of them, and they had to rig a fender with like a map and some duct tape and stuff like that, because it was going to be a non-starter for them. It was throwing lunar dust up in the air and stuff like that. Turns out lunar dust is actually really, really dangerous. Because the dust has not weathered, like on Earth, all the sharp edges got taken out. Lunar dust is basically, you can think of it as being pulverized glass.
Pretty much.
Pulverized volcanic glass. So it's actually dangerous. And this is one of the reasons why lunar spacesuits are so expensive. Like the lunar spacesuits in Apollo 11 had like 22 hours on the surface over the course of the 6 days, 7 days they were down there. They had about 22 hours worth of spacewalks. That 22 hours pretty much trashed the suits. They were done by the end of the 22 hours. Just because it's a fine abrasive grit, potentially dangerous to breathe, bad shit. Now, I knew a guy who wrote software for the lunar rover. I worked with him at CNA. He was not a regular CNA employee, but he was sometimes subcontracted by CNA to come on. He was an adjunct, and we did an exercise together. My first time at sea, this guy was one of the guys that did the exercise. And he told me that his first job out of college, he was a programmer, and he wrote some software that was used in the lunar rover, and it's all magnetic core memory, right? So this stuff is incredibly radiation resistant, and it doesn't turn off when it doesn't vacate when you turn it off. So he said the lunar rover up on the moon, his software is still there, ready to rock and roll. That was pretty cool. TJ says Russian nuclear icebreakers had to be towed to the Antarctic because they were not rated for the water temps. Yeah, especially a problem with nukes because you need lots of water for cooling. And I've heard lots of stories about Russian nuclear icebreakers not doing well in other environments.
I mean, that's Russian tech in general.
Yeah, TJ points out, and I was going to say this, the turbolifts could be self-contained lifeboats.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you think about it, like, everything in a spaceship is made to, in the event of an emergency, self-contain. That's why, like, each deck has, like, different sections that they can close off.
Let's see. Delon says the Shadow War was finished in the first few episodes of season 4. I can't remember exactly when it finished, but I'm going to rewatch the series and tell you about it. Let's see.
I would argue that it was really finished at the end of season 3, and the remaining the what you're talking about at the beginning of season 4 is just end of war skirmishes, where like not everyone's given up, like how in World War II you had the Japanese soldiers that held off on those isolated islands. That's what I would compare that to.
Makes sense. So Olive points out that everybody actually was kung fu fighting, and that it was a little bit frightening. My roommate Mike Lennon in college had the temerity to finish finals week on Monday, when the rest of us had finals on like Thursday and Friday. So he comes back from his final on Monday night and says, I'm going to take a shower, put some music on and crank it. And so I waited until I heard him get on the shower, at which point I put on Kung Fu Fighting. Let's see. Okay, so I am scrolling.
Logic. You are correct. It does. That's why on the moon it appears that things are floating for a bit, because the gravity is 1/6 that of Earth.
Yeah.
So they fall back down at a slower rate.
Yeah, that definitely happens.
Because physics.
Okay, we're getting caught up here. I think we're going to be done in just a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. The self-replicating minds. Definitely.
Olive says, it reminds me of when they put the Atlantis resort at a low Caribbean sandbar, and I was like, welcome to the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Damn. You're not wrong, Olive.
So TJ's asking the question about what exactly the software was. The software that controlled steering and stuff, because it actually had a little computer. The control for the lunar rover was a like a joystick controller. It was sort of like a T-shaped controller that you would hold like this, and you'd sort of like this. I don't know if there was a twisting motion also, but it was
Oh, continue.
I was going to say each one of those wheels had an independent electric motor, and so I'm not even sure that they must have turned some, but it was how all that was controlled, and I'm sure that it was sending telemetry back too, so there had to be some comm software there. But I think if I remember correctly, what Dave told me was that it was software that was part of the control system. And I think So the reason Logic Finest says the reason I ask, this is about moon dust again, is why does the dust from astronauts hopping across the moon fall right back down? The answer is there's no air to slow it down. So it's the gravity is less, but there's no air to cause it to sort of hang.
There's no air resistance at all.
And so it's not going to sort of drift forever. But it does. So it actually does seem like it's coming back down reasonably quickly, but that's just because there's nothing to slow it down. And it looks like, yep, we just got that response.
Yep.
Yeah. So Olive says basically what I was saying. So, okay. So I think we're done. So like I said, no show next week. There will be a show after that. At that point, I'm either going to do the Renegade Legion Prefect discussion, or I'll do a summary, or I might do the torpedo boats one. I'm going to do one of those three is my plan. And I'll still be solo, except if Lissa joins me, because Pat's going to, he might be back by that point, but Pat's got a very busy October. Pat's October is just as busy as mine.
Wait, which weekend are you talking about right now? Next weekend or?
The week after next.
The week after next. Okay.
Next weekend, I'm at a science fiction convention, and so I will be unavailable. So
the week after that, I probably won't be here because my partner has vacation time, and so we're going to be going to like haunted houses and things like that and spending time with his kids.
You should go do that. That sounds like a good thing to do. I will cover it all by myself.
I get to meet his kiddos.
This is good. Important step.
Important things.
Important things. So, but okay, so I think we're done, right?
I believe so. Let's see. There's a couple more comments that just came in.
TJ did say that he could get motivation. That's a response because TJ, you all might recall, TJ is going to do more on admirals and Starfleet, and because we did I believe we did the original series and the movies, but I don't think we did TNG. I think that's where we stopped, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember where we stopped with captains versus where we stopped with admirals. But in any event, TJ's at some point is going to come on and do some more stuff on that. So we did up through the movies, is what he said. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But TJ, at whatever schedule is convenient for you, if you can do it, that'd be great. So, all right then. I think with that, it's time to say goodnight, everybody.
All right, everyone. You have a good one. Live long and prosper, and thank you for being here. Bye.